I guess the thing I keep trying to get at is whether, our current civilization has lost track of the idea of philosophical inquiry in the sense of a natural philosophy, in the sense of the way you spoke about, humans are inherently philosophical. But it seems to me that for whatever reason, we're not spending enough time thinking about the overall drift, except for a few appointed journalists, let's say, and thinkers. But I'm curious, do philosophers get together and talk about how they can, make something bigger and better happen?
The philosophers I know have opposite feelings. There are some who think that philosophers ought to try harder to be public with philosophy, to make some philosophical issues accessible to a broader audience, to publicize philosophy themselves. And there are others who don't want to have anything to do with that. And I respect both sides of that, because so often philosophy loses something when it's I don't want to even say popularized, but when it's publicized, philosophy can lose something, and that's an old standing worry. Back in one of Plato's dialogues, in the Theaetetus, Socrates complains about the school of thought that says everything changes, everything flows. And they said, well, that was fine when Homer disguised it as an allegorical statement, but now they've got it out there, everything flows, and it's just like a rumor, and even a shoemaker, he's banging on his shoes, and he can tell you, oh yeah, everything flows, I heard it. So there's this worry that philosophy can become gossip. Not even news. We want to distinguish here between gossip and news. Although I do find it interesting that in our society, journalists tend to occupy the role of public intellectuals. Mm-hmm. Quite surprising. It's not true in most other countries. It's not true historically, but somehow journalists, I don't know if they do this after they've been reporting for a while, or just because they have access to the outlets, but they do the philosophizing. Not all the philosophers I know think this is a problem. Mm-hmm. And they'll say the opposite thing to you. The nice thing about universities is that you can be shielded from the pressures of the marketplace. The marketplace has a lot of merits to it, but if you want someone to spend 25 years figuring out a problem, you can't also ask them to support themselves by selling what they write. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Those do seem to be two opposite pressures. And the great thing about universities as a home of research is they make it possible for someone to get fascinated by a question and spend a lifetime, spend so much time on it that when they retire, they think, oh good, now I can work more. But I think that's also behind what people see as the disappearance of the public intellectual. Intellectuals in that position might worry that having to go public and be public is going to compromise what they're doing.
It seems to me that a philosopher who is perhaps focusing on these larger issues should put them out there. And I think one of the issues is that philosophical texts end up in journals or in, dusty corners of bookstores. Right. And so your average Joe doesn't have access to them. And so somebody who stands in the position of maybe it's a popularizer, maybe every philosophy department should have a serious social media department where these ideas are getting out there and played with. And, so what? I mean, everyone's bound to be misunderstood. Even Socrates, apparently was manipulated. His ideas were manipulated. He was misunderstood. So maybe it just needs a little bit more courage and willingness to interact and engage, which also goes back to the Socratic method.
And there's certainly something in what you say. However, let me just push back against this idea a little bit, because I remember maybe 6 months ago, a columnist for the Times complained that intellectuals don't write enough for public. I thought, well, fine, give us a place to write. We've got lots of cool things to say. What I know more than professors who don't want to write for public outlets is people who have things that they've written for public outlets and can't find the public outlets. So thanks very much for that idea. Maybe we're approaching it from the wrong side.
Yeah.
Maybe newspapers and magazines ought to be asking philosophers and other academics to contribute, rather than assuming that they're not going to contribute in a good way. Look, there is an image of the professor, not just the philosophy professor. There's an image of professors writing in arcane language, social misfits, would we say? That's part of the picture too. You can have fun with that image. There are reasons why philosophers aren't in the paper.
All right. Well, Realize is going to try to do something about that. Not in the paper. In the flow.
Well, it's all flow.
It's all flow. Oh, so you agree.